tonight we got two speakers. First off, we got Coach Brad Dixon from Central High School in Camp Point, Illinois, which is the western side of the state. He's the head football coach, boys track coach, strength and conditioning coordinator, and his full-time job is actually a PE teacher. So he wears a lot of hats at the school. So we'll let you get going, Coach Dixon. Have at it.
All right. Like he talked about, I wear a lot of hats. I also taught history for like 12 years before I went back and got my PE. So I taught history and PE for a period of time. But I've really got into passion for athletic performance. So what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to try to go fast because I got quite a few slides, and I'm just going to try to give you as much as I can. Don't hesitate to ask questions at the end. I've got every different type of athlete, from volleyball to golf to basketball to football, all mixed in all my classes. So I was able to really push for what we call athletic enhancement or athletic PE. So 4 periods out of the day. In a normal year, now we're on the block schedule because of COVID, but normally I have 4 periods throughout the day, and a little over 100 of our athletes, roughly 80 to 90% of all of our athletes take that. And so we can train consistently year round. So we're working on building athletic performance for all athletes, not just football focused, not just basketball, things like that. So these are just some of the pictures that I put up there of just various teams over the last few years. I'm not going to get in much of this. Like I said, I've coached a little bit of everything, and I've taught a little bit of everything. I played 1 year. I don't have a fancy CSCS or even a USA weightlifting or any of that stuff. So, the things that I do now are because people have influenced me in doing it, or over, 18 years of working in strength and conditioning, I've found things that I like and things that I don't like. My first confession is that I do some powerlifting. So I've always been a number chaser. Not always, but for the longest time coaching, I've chased 600-pound deadlift, 405-pound squat, things like that. Got the strength record board. So a lot of things that I talk about today are not going to be really weight room focused, but that's who I am. So it's taken a lot for me to try to transition out of always thinking weight room is the end all be all for everything, because that's kind of what's in my blood. But so don't think that I've never been in a weight room before. And then confession 2 is, and I got this, if you don't know Coach Holler, he's kind of one of my mentors. He and I hooked up probably 3 or 4 years ago. I reached out to, I first got to know him through track, and then I reached out to him on some football stuff. And we've become good friends and been able to speak alongside each other several times over the last several years. But he said something at a clinic that I was at in Chicago 2 winters ago. And he said, most coaches don't want to learn how to cook. They just want the damn recipe. And that's how I always was. I wanted someone to tell me, this is exactly how you should do something. I don't really have recipes. Hopefully I've just got some things that you can take and put into your system, because everyone's in a different, some people are training a few athletes in the morning. Some people have maybe PE. Some of you are trying to fit it into practice. I don't know all your situations, but I'm trying to give you some big rocks, some pillar things that I think are important. Because I think that as a coach, as a strength professional, whatever your title is, you got to be willing to accept it, teach it, and believe in it. And so just because I say that's what we do, you may not believe that, and that's not going to be a part of your program because that's not what you think, and that's perfectly fine. And so I always say, take what you like, throw out what you don't like, ask questions if there's things you want me to answer on maybe why we do certain things as I go through here. So some of my influences, if you want to take a picture of this, any of these guys are phenomenal resources of information. Barry Ross is dead, but he wrote a book called Underground Secrets of Faster Running. It's a pretty solid book. Tony Holler mentioned Chris Corfus. So that's Chris there. They run the track football consortium throughout the country. Dan Fichter has his own gym, teaches and coaches in New York. Huge on neuro training. Cal Dietz, strength coach, Minnesota hockey, part of the RPR crew. Brian Kula down here trains Christian McCaffrey. Rob Assisi is a track coach here in Illinois. Kurt Hester's here. He's the strength coach at Louisiana Tech, wrote Rants of a Strength Conditioning Madman. Zach Dakant, I think is how you pronounce it, from TCU Baseball. He's phenomenal. Follow on Twitter, Mike Boyle, Ken Clark, Charlie Francis. So just some of the things that I've pulled pieces from in doing this. So I want to give some shout outs to them. A few of these ideas are of my own, just thinking them through. It's mainly, okay, I like that, I'm going to add that and put that together. So the question I get pretty consistently is weight room versus sprint training. You a lot of times you end up seeing people that are all in on the weight room, do a little bit of running, do some conditioning, and then you got people that are all in on sprint work and don't do much in the weight room. And so me, as a football coach, as a track coach, and training athletes of all different sports, I heard Chris Corpus one time say, quit thinking of those two as separate entities. Think of them all as exercise. A 40-yard dash is an exercise, or a 10-yard fly, the same that squats an exercise, cleans an exercise, deadlift, whatever. And then put it together and say, okay, what exercises are improving our athletic performance? So, not what weight room and what sprint, but what exercises collectively, what is helping us become better athletes? Because that's what we want to do with training. Unless you are in charge of a powerlifting team, your weight room work should transfer to your sport, to your field, to your game, to the court, whatever the scenario is. And just because someone squats a certain number, deadlifts a certain number, doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to transfer. So we have to look at it as a whole. So then the next question I usually get is, well, how do you know what exercises? Well, that's a great question. I think individually people respond to different stimuluses, depending on how much time you got, how big your groups are. I think there's some big things that are common throughout most people, but I do think that some people respond better to the weight room, and other people respond better, out of the weight room. I really do, and somewhere in between. So a key thing that Coach Holler talks about, and he's kind of coined it, record, rank, and publish. Unless we are collecting data, we really don't know what we're doing, if what we're doing is working. And I don't just mean tracking how much weight they're lifting in the weight room. I think that's a common thing, that as long as our weights in the weight room are going up, we're getting better. And that's not always the case. And in fact, a lot of times we reach a point where our risk reward, or our rate of return for what we're getting out of the weight room, is not really showing up in our athletic performance. So some of those key principles on things that I believe in across the board, no matter the athlete, no matter what we're doing. Something that doesn't get talked about enough: rest and recovery. That's the best performance enhancer. Not, not protein, not creatine, not all these supplements, but simply sleep. Most of our kids do not sleep enough. And a good way to encourage them to sleep more is when you start tracking their data and their sprint times and in jumping and things like that. When you start to see dips in their numbers and things, it's a good time to have a conversation. A lot of times you might find out that they're just not sleeping much. What they eat's important. I always say, if you can get it out of a package and pop it in the microwave, it's probably not good for you, right? If you actually have to cook it though, and you can't microwave it the first time, it's probably quality. And so we try to encourage our athletes to eat, but again, they're high school kids that I'm dealing with, and they're going to swing through the gas station and get a candy bar and things like that. Speed and power is my next priority. I want our athletes to be fast, explosive, and powerful. Like I said, I'm not trying to find that 600-pound deadlifter. I'm not trying to find the guy that squats 500. I'm trying to see, which of our athletes can move the best, which of our athletes can explode the best in these various tests. We always do that at the beginning of the week when we're the most fresh. And I think the key other misconception a lot of people have is that you get faster just in the weight room, that as long as you are squatting and things like that, you're going to get faster. Yes, to an extent for some, others no. All right. Some people might get slower every time you back squat them. Others might get better to a certain point, and some athletes respond pretty well to it. So The best way, though, to get faster is to run at max speed, not a sub max speed, not a conditioning, but to be able to run at your max velocity. And I'll get into that a little bit about speed reserves and speed capacity and what those kind of mean. And then obviously plyometrics or jump training, learning how to land and absorb force before you create it. Strength, yes, it's important. Obviously, strength is important in several avenues in the weight room, and we'll talk about that from tendon resiliency to, build mass for a football athlete or whatever. But too much of a focus on it could have some adverse effects to your speed or power. And that's where it's important to test some of these things that we're going to talk about. Barry Ross, JT Ayers, who's a track coach in California, and like I said, Brian Kula, who's trained Christian McCaffrey, talk a lot about mass specific force. In other words, maintaining your mass, but being able to create more force at the same body weight instead of always having to gain weight. If you have an athlete that's like right now, our best running back is 6 foot, 203 pounds. He doesn't need to be any heavier. In fact, the heavier he was, the more mass we put on him, the slower he'd be, or the harder he would have to work to generate the same amount of force. But I'd also understand on the flip side, my 135-pound freshman running back needs to gain some mass. So there's times and places where, it's not always mass specific. Sometimes we need that hypertrophy stages, phases, and things like that. I think we all talk about this, proper movement patterns. Kids have to know how to move before we're going to add an external load. And if we add an external load too early, we are actually going to reinforce bad movement patterns, which then are probably going to power us down actually, because our brain's not going to feel safe and it's going to shut things off, and obviously it can lead to injury. A couple quotes here from my buddy Dan Fichter. Isometric strength and being able to hold positions are fundamental to locomotion. You have to be able to support yourself in positions. So we usually start in the weight room with isometrics, meaning we want to teach people how to get in certain positions and hold that position before we're going to worry about adding loads and things like that. When posture and positions are correct, the brain has a better opportunity to recognize information from muscle fibers in order to give the correct commands. So when we get ourselves in what I would say a brain-friendly position where it feels safe, because that's literally our brain's job, is to keep us alive. And when we do things that have adverse effects to that, that's what it goes into, fight or flight. And I'm not going to get into the neurological side of training and something we use called RPR in that tonight because I don't have time. But you have to think of the body from a brain standpoint before you think of it from a muscle standpoint. That neurologically, the brain has to operate before any muscle is going to move. And as easy as it was said to me was, cadavers or dead people have muscles. Without the brain and the neurological system, then, nothing's going to move. And so we've got to start there first. And like I said, that's a talk for a different time. Okay. Go forward. Okay. So what things do we record, rank, and publish then? Well, we kind of break ourselves up into different days. So we have what we call max velocity or vertical force day, where we're focusing on top end speed and we're focusing on putting vertical force into the ground, right? What research has shown is it's not how far our stride lengths are and how far we step or how long they are. It's all about the force that we're putting into the ground and that rate of force development. And so we do things like a 10-yard fly, a 20-yard fly, 30. You can lengthen them out how you want. We do vertical jump testing, drop jump, depth jump. I'm going to show you videos on this. A sound test where we measure. And a fly run is just they have an opportunity to get up to speed, and then we measure a certain segment. Then we have an acceleration or a horizontal force day. Most of our sports are played in acceleration. So we have different starts that we use. We do broad jump, triple broad jump. You can do medicine ball throw. And then we don't do tons of change of direction things. We probably do more in terms of the reactionary agility and obstacle course. But a lot of sports are going to take care of a lot of that stuff. And I kind of have to pick my poison when my class periods sometimes are only 38 minutes long and such. And so that's not something we focus a ton on. And we don't do the speed ladders or any of those things where we're not challenging our athletes to make decisions in space and move. I'm pretty old school in terms of how I collect the data. So I've got everyone's names based upon where they are in my class alphabetically. I have their average time and their best time, so they know, because I didn't always do that. And they would always ask, hey, where's that? And I'd say, hey, you just ran your PR, or hey, that's good, you're still under your average. I mean, kid's not going to PR every single day. And then I've got the cells that we do that. And then I transfer all of that stuff over into Google Sheets. And so I've got spreadsheets that are set up that tell me where they were last year. This is just a 40-yard dash, just our top guys, where they are this year as an average, their very best. And by best, I mean, I always average their top 2 out of 3. And if they have a time that's kind of wonky, that's way out there, let's say they ran a 484, a 478, and then they have like a 450, I would make them verify that 450. And if they came back and ran like a 482, I would throw that one out. So we're always averaging the best 2 out of 3. So this isn't the best time that they've ever had. And by time, we use what's called a free lap system. We got ours from Simply Faster. It works extremely well. It's super easy to set up. You could use it in football practice. It's wireless. It's Bluetooth. If you buy this system, the kids wear chips on their belt and it sends it to your phone. It's super simple. Other things, here's a vertical jump. So we've got a Just Jump mat, which you'll see in a few of the videos that we record vertical jump. Before we had the Just Jump mat, we recorded them we had tape on the wall, super old school. But again, we're tracking data across the board. What's happening with these athletes. And you can see, because of COVID, how much missed training sessions that these athletes had as we had quarantines and things going on. So when we talk max velocity, we're talking about the highest possible sprint speed that you can achieve. So what is the fastest? And I like the 10-yard fly or the 10-meter. My kids like the 10-yard because a lot of them are football. And I think it has, some of the better numbers, like a 100 is going over 20 mile an hour in a 10-yard fly. And so, a 100 and a 10-meter fly is 22, 30.37 miles per hour. That's pretty hard to achieve. So I like challenging kids to get to that 100 and a 10-yard fly. And I'll kind of explain how I do that. And then the reason that we focus so much on max velocity is, and people always say, well, what about acceleration? What about conditioning? How much of that stuff you do? We don't do a ton of conditioning, because if you train slow, you're going to run slow. And so we want to raise the ceiling on all of our athletes. And you can kind of see this cool little chart from Derek Hansen of what happens at your submax, or what I call your game speed, right? If you're slow, which 10.9 meters a second is not slow, but if you're slow, you're going to be really slow in a game. If you're super fast, even though you're not going to play the game at as fast as you are, you're going to be very game fast. And so the faster we get in that top end speed, the faster we're going to be. And I always think of it like this: why are my fastest guys never tired in the conditioning? Why are they always finishing? Why are my slowest guys always finishing last? And why are they always tired? And I think of it like this: like, my fastest guy might be using 75% of his ceiling to run a conditioning, whereas my slowest guy is probably trying to use 100%, and he just physically can't do it. We work a ton on sprint mechanics, and I know this is a debatable topic, how much mechanic works that you do, especially for a team sport athlete. I think from an injury prevention standpoint, and from a body movement standpoint, I think it's very important to teach kids how to move in the cross crawl pattern and sprint mechanics. And so we do a ton of those. We call them speed drills. We do them at the beginning of all of our workout sessions, including practice. So we got rid of dynamic warm-ups. So we don't do that type of stuff. We do not static stretch. We do these as drills, and I call them drills so that kids focus on them. When you call something a warm-up, it kind of gives kids permission to take it slow and take it easy. We want our kids to be very focused when we're doing these speed drills. Here's some pictures of us working on some feet and ankle stuff. I mean, the first thing that hits the ground is your foot, and I'll show you some befores and after. And if our feet and ankles don't work properly, I mean, I think some studies, and I don't remember the exact study Chris Corpus talked about, but you can lose up to 75% of your power output because of poor foot function and function, because that power, instead of going in the direction that you want to go, if my foot hits, right, and it hits and it's pointed in, it's pointed out, then I have to do something else. My body has to compensate for bad foot function, and I'm wasting power, and I'm also compensating in some fashion. Like I said, I'll show you some befores and after. So here's what a good tripod position, where the athlete's over the ball of their big toe. They're able to get up onto what's known as the forefoot. I mean, that's what should happen when that foot hits the ground. And a lot of us, including me, people that have poor foot function, they roll to the outside. Their ankles collapse, and you're going to see them spin out. That's a common thing. I get people that message me, "Hey, I got these athletes, their foot hits, they spin," and you'll be able to see some of the things. So here's just some of the progressions that we do. We call these boom booms, just because when you hit the ground, it just boom boom. So this is some of our just rudimentary stuff. Anytime you can take the arms away, the lower body has to be pretty good. So a lot of us use our arms kind of like as rudders as we run. If you got those kids that swing their arms and do all this, well, it's probably because they're literally compensating for what's going on in their lower body. So if you take the athletes, whether arms in the air, they cross them, and you take that away, then their foot has to hit much better because they don't have that arm to compensate with what's going on. We go through a hop and a bound series. We don't just start with regular bounding. Kids have trouble doing those things, absorbing force and or generating. So we start just with a basic series, just single leg hops over a hurdle. The hurdle just kind of being a benchmark to get up and over. And you'll see some good and some bad on how we're absorbing force. We'll go a little bit faster, looking for the heel not to collapse. You can see the heel collapsing on that second athlete. It tells you a lot about poor ankle function. Then we'll lengthen them out a little bit. Again, we're doing same leg. So a hop would be, for me, jumping and landing on the same leg. A bound would be switching. So again, we're starting from a rudimentary standpoint, especially when we started back after COVID, and we went about 4 or 5 months without any training at all. Fast forward, you can see it's going a little bit faster there. And then here's us really trying to absorb that. So this is one of our better guys. He's just working on hitting, exploding back up. I like using the mini hurdles, telling them to jump as high as they can over it in that fashion. So we go through that. We teach that. We teach how a 2-foot land, just call them altitude drops. So you're dropping from a certain altitude. It was taught to me in terms of, from a brain standpoint, if your body doesn't feel comfortable landing from a certain height, let's say a 30-inch landing, then you're never going to generate a 30-inch vertical jump if your body doesn't feel safe landing it. So we'll do different things. We'll focus on not collapsing. We'll do a depth jump after a pause, and then we'll do them all in a row. So these are all progressions that we'll go through, and kids may stay at certain progressions for a long time, depending on where they're at. Here's us doing some hurdle jumps. We call these hurdle jumps as part of our speed drills. So we're generating power up and over an imaginary hurdle. You can use hurdles. I've got kids at many different athletic abilities. And so if I try to get a hurdle height out there, I'll have some kids that it's good for and others that it's not. We're trying to teach them to get up as high as they can and get those feet up and over the hurdle. We do a ton of wickets or mini hurdle runs all along a line, so we can be striking on each side of that line, and we can be staying off the midline, which is a common problem. You see us here, we're using broken hockey sticks. This kid's using a water bag filled with about 25% water, and that water sloshes around. And again, it challenges you to make sure your foot strike is where it needs to be. And so here's a couple things that happen when we strike midline and we strike on the outside of our foot and our foot spins. You can see what happens to the hip. You can see what happens to the shoulders. We throw our head a certain way, and there's no symmetry there. So then after going through drills, coming back, testing, retesting video, looking at this data, you can see the difference between where he's at, how much more this heel is under that earlobe and not across the opposite side. Here's an athlete that has a girl athlete with a ton of backside mechanics. And then here you can see what's happening as her foot's in that landing phase, as she's coming through much easier and she's going to be able to generate more force. And then you can see one of our other better senior athletes here in much better positionings. And so we work on that on a consistent basis. Here's us running a 10-yard fly. So then we take those mechanics and you can see those free lap cones. There was one up there about 10 yards and then it sends it to my phone. Here's the just jump mat. So we're just measuring that. It's also, you can see that cord there. It sends it there. See another one of our athletes. Here we are, again, an older athlete with a depth jump. We're trying to jump as high as we are landing from. So he's probably on a 2-foot box there. See, he's getting back up to that height. Here we are with our 6-foot bound test. So we just tell the athletes from a 2-point start, we're wanting them to jump 6 times, and we're measuring the distance each time and really teach them to put force into the ground on that single leg. And once you put a tape measure out there, I mean, these kids really try. And I think he's jumping 52 or 54 there in 6 bounds. And then acceleration, I think we all know what acceleration is, that change in velocity over time, right? Most of our sports are played in that. So we've got our max V stuff, and then we do things with acceleration and shin angle change. So these are some of the basic drills where we're teaching our athletes how to get as horizontal of a shin angle as we can. So this is just a basic 2-foot instead of kind of that falling start. And then we do it off of a single leg. And you'll see them, we're trying to get that shin angle down and get that good 4-foot rocker position. Okay. You'll see us coming out of a 2-point here off the ground. This is one of the more harder ones, being able to keep that shin angle. Okay. And then you'll see us, let me go forward here a little bit, speed up a little bit. Here we are coming out of that. Again, these are all acceleration type activities where you can see my guy here in the front, my older athlete. Watch him. Look at this shin angle change and look at the straight lines he's creating. And then look at my freshman athlete here. And you can see how his shin's vertical and you can see how he's bent over. And that's not what we're looking for. And then we carry that over to just a basic standing broad jump, and you can see the same shin angle change. And we're measuring power output here. These are all things that we're record ranking and publishes, from broad jump to the 6 bounds to 10-yard flies, 40s, things like that. Here we do it from a triple broad jump. So now we're going to do 3 consecutive. Again, you can see the shin angles. That's why I slowed it down. Absorbing, you can see him drop the shins, exploding out. And so we're measuring how far he gets I call it a triple broad jump. There's no triple jump, if you're familiar with that as a track exercise. It's just 3. I should just call it the 3 broad jump test. For some reason I called it triple broad jump, and that's just what I called it. So that's some of the things that we test from a data perspective to see if what we're doing in the weight room. So a little bit quickly here about the weight room, where does it fit in? Well, obviously, growth hormone and testosterone. That's what we're looking for in the weight room, right? We get a tissue adaptation when we put an external load on our body and we lift it. We're also looking for that muscle fiber conversion, right, to those fast twitch muscles. From an explosive point of view, that's what we're looking for. when you can load down in an isometric some of your techniques, I think that's good. You can load the body, you can get strong in positions, whether that's football athlete, a sprinter. I think that's important. We already talked about tendon and ligament resiliency. And then as we eventually get to a position of strength, adequate strength, then we transition to power development, or the ability to apply that force and develop it in a faster fashion. So a couple quotes here I like. Again, I mentioned Zach. Determine key performance indicators and or the skill itself, and track when performance no longer improves when the strength continues to go up. So whatever you determine to be an appropriate test for you, when that stops increasing as the strength continues to go up, is the point that occurs when it's safe to say that transfer from strength may not be occurring anymore. So in other words, the more strength work you do, you're not seeing that performance out on the field, or whatever important indicator you're using. And then Matt Ray at Alabama, obviously they had a phenomenal year in college football. They're kind of changing the landscape of S&C at the college level. Said for high school and collegiate football players, a dual focus on strength and power until the athlete achieves 1.7 body weight in the squat. Above that, a more substantial focus on power improvement will have a greater impact on speed. And I personally don't use the 1.7. That's what he's collected through his data and his research. We're always tracking the weights that we're using and those other metrics to see, okay, we've kind of gotten stagnant in our jumps and in our sprints. Maybe we need to transition to a speed power phase and quit moving heavy weight. And then this is a good, just kind of a diagram, right? Here's where we are for a long time from a strength and a weight room perspective. When we get these kids that are pretty young and green, then we kind of hit this point where, okay, all this input we're putting in and we're not getting much of a rate of return. And then eventually, the harder we push to keep adding weight to the squat bar, to the deadlift, or the bench press, then we start getting a negative return. And so it's not always a positive thing. You could go in the weight room for a period of time and see some negatives. And so this is just a 3-day example. I want to finish with this, what this might look like. So we would have a max V day, an acceleration and explosive lift, or kind of total body, and then a max V and a lower. Or we could substitute for a change of direction depending on where we're at. And so we always do our drill work and our sprint jump work first, and then we do various variations, obviously bench press, inverted row, pull-ups, shoulder, tricep, things like that. And then we have a vertical press, and I'm sure things that you guys all do. We do that. I go back and forth on the clean. These are just things. Some people swear by the clean. Others would rather just hex bar jump or dumbbell jump from a loaded position and get the same power output. I don't. It's one thing I don't have yet is a fancy like a VMAX Pro or something that's going to measure peak power or average power output. That's our next step. And then you can see I save our lower body lift whenever I know we're going to have the most recovery. So like right now, our big night is Friday night. We'll hit our lower lift on Monday. But when we're out of season, we're going to hit that when we got the weekend to recover. So, and then I threw in some curls at the end just for fun, as I talked a lot about not the weight room, and then I added some things in there at the end. So I try to go fast. I know I probably went over by 5 minutes or so, but